Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Parekh, and I am the guest host for this week's New York Times Read Along. It's a very special read along this week. We're focusing on the 52 Places edition of the from the New York Times travel section. I'm just turning around to get a little better light. I'm here at the home of Amy Virshup, the editor for the New York Times travel section, and joining us is Sebastian Modak, who was the 52 Places 2019 traveler. So he's going to be sharing some of his experiences from last year, and we'll be also talking about this year's list. So please hit share and let us know where you're watching from. We're definitely going to be asking Sebastian and Amy if they've been to any of those places. It's a tradition that Sree likes to do with all of his guests. But I think it's going to be particularly interesting with Amy and Sebastian. As you may have seen, the 52 Places list was released this week on June 9th. Sorry, January 9th. June 9th is my birthday, so obviously that triggered. And it's in print this Sunday. So we are especially honored and just so glad to be able to do this show today. So we have a great production team bringing this to you live. We have Paula Tiger managing things on Facebook. We have Steve Taylor managing things on LinkedIn. And you can see their social handles at the bottom of your screen. And we have Tim Sohn, who is managing StreamYard for us. So Tim, thank you for joining us this week on the Read Along. So again, as comments come in, Tim will be showing the comments on the screen. This is one of the new things that we're doing with live streaming. For 4 years, Sree has been hosting the New York Times Read Along every Sunday, mostly from his apartment on the Upper West Side or when he was traveling from other locations. I've guest hosted when he's not available, and we've mostly been using Facebook to do this. But in December, we switched to a great app called StreamYard. If you're interested in live streaming or want to know how you might be able to use it for your organization or nonprofit, please let me know. StreamYard allows us to multi-stream to different platforms and lets us do some fun things with graphics and overlays. We can also show videos when we need to and other text on the screen, pictures, etc. So please make sure your comments are coming in to Facebook and LinkedIn. Our host on LinkedIn, Steve Taylor, will be sending your messages to Tim so he can put them into the bottom of the screen. I can't see any messages yet from folks. Tim, make sure to plop any comments that come in. So we have Jonathan Borstein joining us from the East Village. Sebastian, Amy?
Been there.
East Village? You've been there? Good. Okay. Mark Lee is joining us from Durham, North Carolina.
Never.
No, North Carolina. Deborah Kerr from Fort Lauderdale,
Been there.
Florida. Been there. Paula Kiger is from Tallahassee. She is one of our producers. The Panhandle?
Nope.
No. Ron Thomas. Now, Ron Thomas was our guest last week. I'm going to take a moment here. He's joining us from Dubai.
My parents live there. Been there many times.
Sebastian's parents live in Dubai. So Ron is a HR professional, HR strategist, and he joins our read along every week, regardless of where he is. He's based in Dubai, but he's often traveling in Southeast Asia, in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. So Ron, thank you for joining us. Diane is joining us from Margate, New Jersey. It's another local. And Pradnya is saying good morning as well. She is based in Silver Spring, Maryland, near where I am. So Sebastian has been there. And Susan Portnoy is from the Upper West Side, which is right where we are. So Susan.
We're Hamilton Heights.
Oh, Hamilton Heights.
But I have been on the Upper West Side.
Upper West Side. We're a little further from the Upper West Side. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera around and introduce you to our guests real quick. Amy Virshup is here as well as Sebastian. So we'll start with Amy. We have Amy, and we'll show your social handles on the screen. Amy, you're the travel editor for the New York Times now,
Right.
but you were the Metro editor and a features editor
I was the
before that,
deputy
right?
Metro editor.
Deputy Metro.
And I edited the weekly Metropolitan section, which people here in New York get as a standalone print section. And if you read the national edition, it's the New York coverage on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran that, and I also ran daily Metro coverage of education and immigration.
You traded Metro for the world as
Exactly.
your tagline, right?
Exactly.
And so you joined the travel desk as the editor last year.
Yes,
right?
last year at about October. So this is my second time doing the 52 places.
I was going to ask in terms of the timing. So were you involved in the selection of the 2019 list last
Yes,
year?
I was, although the process had already started once when I got there, because we started the week after Labor Day
Mm-hmm.
This year. And that actually people were like, when are we starting? When are we starting?
Take a moment when
Yeah.
you start.
So it does start months ahead of time. So when I joined last year, we were partway through the process, but I was involved in creating the list for 2019.
Sure. And so then we'll turn to Sebastian Modak, Seb Modak on almost all social channels. I'll get a little bit better for the lighting here. So Sebastian, you were our 5219, and I say our because you really belong to all of us, not just the Times. Our 52 places traveler for 2019. What did you do before taking on that assignment?
I was in travel journalism before as well. I was at Condé Nast Traveler for about 3 years, first as an editor and then a staff writer on the digital team. And before that, kind of bounced around doing different media things, but always with some sort of international focus.
Great, great. So what I'm going to ask both of you, if you haven't already, to please take out your phones and make sure to share the live streams both on Facebook. You can also retweet on Twitter, and I'll flip the camera around again and try and get better lighting. So I want to make sure that we have, if there are other people that have joined since, my name is Neil Parekh, and I'm the guest host for this week. We have Akruti is joining us from Buffalo, New York. Thank you, Akruti. Diane Hughes is from Hell's Kitchen, so again, close by, and several other folks. And Ron is just saying it was his treat to be on the show last week. So Ron, thank you again. We really thought that was a great show. We can only hope that Amy and Sebastian will feel the same after they've gone through their paces. Our friend Stephen Kaplan, who is a former photo editor for the New York Times, he was a guest on the 22nd from the Museum of the City of New York, is saying hello. He's from Ramsey, New Jersey. So please, and Lotse is bringing good vibes from Bhutan, but currently in the U.S. Sebastian, did you make it to Bhutan?
No, actually, it was on the list last year.
It was on the 2018 list.
2018,
Yeah, so Jada.
That's right.
2 years ago.
Jada Wan did
Yep.
last year. Great. So I'm going to ask, make sure everyone hits share, and I'm going to see if I can do the same real quick. This is one of the things that we want to do as much as possible when we have the read along is make sure that we can get as much exposure as possible. So I'm going to go onto my Facebook, and if you go to readalong.link, 52 places, that'll take you right there. One of the ways that we do that is we use an app called Rebrandly, which is a link shortener, but it lets you change the destination of the URL after you put it out there. So we've taken advantage of that. So here is on my screen, and I'm going to hit share real quick. There we go. So at least get the Facebook share out there. And so we do have the paper today, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes looking at the front page because there are some major stories out that we want to just point to. And this incredible story on the dominant story on the front page, 7 Days in January, Secret Orders, A Deadly Strike, and a World on Edge, by Peter Baker, Ronan Bergman, David Kirkpatrick, Julian Barnes, and Alyssa Rubin. I saw this online earlier, just looking how close we came to war with Iran over the last week or so. The lead story, you can get in there, is Iran's admission that it shot down a jet, the Ukrainian jet. So again, just all the turmoil in the Middle East. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk to Sebastian about the 52 places list in 2019. Iran actually was on the list. So we'll talk to Sebastian and ask him a little bit about the places that he was able to get to and some of the ones that he was not able to get to, particularly for those reasons. The other thing I wanted to point out real quickly, just in terms of the importance of the story, is the New York Times Magazine piece, which is, in the escalating chaos of the Middle East, this enigmatic Gulf prince, aka MBZ, may soon emerge as the region's most powerful leader. What does he want? So clearly, between the dominant story, the lead story, and the magazine, a lot of interesting pieces to talk about. So what we want to do, though, is focus on travel. And we have the travel section, a gorgeous photo on the front page, and you can see a full page picture. It's not often that a picture only has a cut line on the front page, but you can see here that that's all we have. Even as the rise of India's tech industry has altered many of its urban landscapes, the city of Jodhpur remains a rustic hub of art and culture. This is the cover of the 52 places list, and highlighting the blue city of Jodhpur. So we will certainly get to the 52 places list for 2020. But first, I'd like to talk to Sebastian about his experience with the traveling for 2019. So walk us through the process. Was it a want ad that you saw? Was it an email that someone sent you? Did anyone think you were crazy to take up the assignment?
I think most people, for the last question, most people did. I actually applied last year, or sorry, 2 years ago, I guess, when the first iteration of it as well, and got pretty far in the process, but didn't work out. And then this year came around, and I was like, let's give it another shot. And then it worked out. So
Great.
And I remember I was at my partner's company Christmas party, Christmas party, when I got the call. Stepped outside and found out and came back, and I was like, so I gotta pack my bags in 2 weeks because I'm hitting the road very, very soon. So yeah, it was a quick ramp up, and then as of mid-January, I was on the road and didn't stop until 2 weeks ago.
Just 2 weeks. You came back right before the
right
New
before
Year, right?
Christmas. Actually.
Christmas, actually.
Yeah. So I got back on the 22nd of December. Yeah.
Great. So you had a great piece, kind of a year in review for you, and I'm just gonna block the light behind you. No, so you stay
Okay.
where you are. I'll play with the camera. A great year in review piece.
Thank you.
Is there one place that stands out for you?
It's the question I get asked most, and it's the hardest question to answer, for multiple reasons. I think one, it depends so much on what you're into. There were places that the nature was just awesome. There were places where the cities really grabbed me. Also, I spent such a short time in each place that I'd never pretend to be the authority on any of them. So to kind of rank places feels strange to me. But there are definitely places that really just blew my mind. Like Siberia was unbelievable. I had this image of Siberia as kind of this barren, frozen wasteland, but it's far from that. There's tons of life and tons of beauty. Norway was incredible. I was in Chile for a solar eclipse. There were places that surprised me too. I fell in love with Bulgaria. I was in a town called Plovdiv, which is the second biggest city in the country. And it was one of the places where within a couple of days, I was like, I could live here for a few months, you know, rent an apartment, do some writing. So there are places that surprised me as well.
Yeah. We were talking about some of the news in this morning's paper, and specifically Iran. You were supposed to go to Iran last year,
Yes.
right? What happened?
Yeah, it was actually, you know, so I got the job before I knew the places I was going to be going. And
Sure.
so I got the job, and then I got the list shortly afterwards before they published it.
Here's a
Um,
job. We're not going to give you the details.
right.
And
But obviously I'm going to say yes to it.
yeah.
And I saw Iran was on the list, and I was immediately so excited because it was a place that, as an American citizen, I thought maybe I'd never get to, or I'd have to do it as part of like I don't know, group tour or whatever later in my life. So I was very excited, and it was about say like March or April where we made the call that it just wasn't going to happen. That was when March was when I went to Doha in Qatar, and the idea was obviously from there to go to Iran, and it was just one, the likelihood of me getting a visa as an American journalist, even back in March, April, was very low as tensions were rising. There were also just concerns about my security once I was on the ground. If I went in as a tourist and they found out I was a journalist, obviously that's a
Sure.
no-go. So we just had to make the call, and I was really disappointed when we did make that call. But looking at the news now, there's probably a good reason we did. And it was extra disappointing because even still now, like every week, I'll get messages on Instagram from people in Iran, Iranians in Iran, saying now that like they're so sad I couldn't make it, and before it was messages saying like, we welcome you to our country.
Sure.
I'd love for you to stay with me.
Sure.
Let me show you around. I've got cousins in Isfahan I can hook you up with. You know, just amazing to see, and like it just highlights the disconnect sometimes between what's going on in our geopolitics and what's going on the ground when it's just people to people interactions, right?
And there have been several incidents of, whether they were reporters like Jason Rezan from the Washington Post. We had tourists that have been detained.
Right.
So it certainly is a concern. Before you did took on the assignment, did you get any training, any either in personal security or awareness or
Yeah, I mean,
self-defense even?
I had like 2 weeks at the times before I left, and it was a whole host of trainings, and one of them was with a security specialist that was just kind of giving me the rundown of what to do if things, you know, if I did get detained at some border or whatever. Luckily, that didn't happen, but I did have somebody, a security expert at the times, basically saved on my phone, and he was like, call me any time of day. If I'm not around, we'll reroute you to someone who can help you.
A 911, effectively.
Basically, yeah. Luckily, I didn't have to use it.
Good. Good.
Yeah, didn't even come close.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. So in your travels, one of the things that you wrote about was your ability to blend in to your surroundings, being ethnically ambiguous, I think is the way you phrased it. And tell us a little bit about that. What is it like to be able to travel when people don't know your background?
Yeah, I found it was like, for the most part, it was almost a form of camouflage. I felt, you know, in Uzbekistan, everyone thought I was Uzbek. In Tunisia, everyone thought I was Tunisian. In Latin America, obviously, people thought I was Latin American. My mother's from Colombia. In India, it was Indian. So
your father's Indian.
My father's from
right?
India, yeah. And I don't know, I just found it was like I could walk home at night in some of these places, and people wouldn't even give me a second look. You know, it wasn't like I was like tourist, you know, lost tourist trying to find his hotel.
You may have been lost trying to find your hotel.
I was definitely lost, but I didn't look it, you know, to an untrained eye. I had, you know, people in Tunisia coming up to me and asking me for directions. In Uzbekistan, I remember I was out in Tashkent and I was like taking some photographs, and this guy comes up to me and starts just speaking in like rapid fire Uzbek. And I was like, I don't speak Uzbek. And then it turns out he spoke English, and he was like, "Oh, I thought you were like a university student or something, like doing some art project." I found it was very interesting. I mean, I hadn't experienced it to this extent before. There were times, not places, I should say, times when there was a flip side to that. When I was in Australia, I had, you know, some kids yell some offensive things at me. Yeah. And I've had that experience before and in other places. So obviously it's not always peachy, but for the most part, it was a kind of a revelation to me or a realization to me that like being this sort of ethnic, ethnically ambiguous person, which there are more and more of us these days.
Sure, sure.
It's kind of an interesting way to travel. It's very different, I think, from the experience of many people.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that experience in Australia, if you don't mind. From talking to folks, obviously, there's a history and a lot of issues around racism in the United States that we are, I think some people are well aware of, some people are learning about, and hats off to the New York Times for their work on the 1619 Project in terms of the modern impact of slavery. We had a special edition of the read along that week with a guest, Sunny Slaughter, where we focused just on that topic. My understanding is that racism, racism takes many forms, and bias, it takes on different forms in other parts of the world. It's not necessarily the same that we experience here. Were there other places besides Australia that you found that type of response to your perceived background?
Not really, honestly. I mean, I get put in the random security line at every airport in the United
Random
States.
check,
So,
right? Yeah.
I mean, there's that. That hasn't changed. Part of that ethnic ambiguity is also looking Arab, and that's enough to get put in the random security line in the U.S. still, unfortunately. But in Australia, it was interesting because this isn't really answering your question, but when I was traveling, when I was in places like Uzbekistan or Tunisia, I'd get messages from a lot of people on Instagram being like, "Oh, it looks amazing, but like, is it safe? Like, are you safe?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." One time that I felt unsafe was in Australia, which like isn't necessarily what you'd expect, right? And it all goes down to like identity plays such a big role in how you travel, and it's going to affect your experience. And obviously, I'm not painting a wide brush over Australia. Like it was encouraging to see. I wrote about it in my piece about Australia. And the response, the comments were mostly Australians being like, "So sorry this happened to you. Like so many places, it's a problem we're dealing with, that we're trying to deal with. Please don't take it as like all Australians are like this. Obviously, they're not." So it's a problem. It's happening. It happens all over the world. I'm sure my experience would be different if I looked different in a different place.
Speaking of Instagram, we had a guest join the show, and I apologize. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. But Tim, if you can put it back on the screen, I can at least make an attempt. Wanzheng Cool is my guess. Was mentioning that they followed your Instagram account for a long time. You interacted with people on Instagram, on Twitter, in the comments on New York Times articles. You also have a Facebook page. Are there other platforms that you were using, or were those the primary ones?
No, it was mostly that. Instagram was probably the biggest. I think at the height of the trip, I was probably getting over 100 messages a day from people who were just following along, complete strangers. And I kind of treated it as part of a job. Was at the end of the night, I'd like go to a bar, grab a beer, and just reply to messages and talk to people. It led to friendships. Like there was, I was in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't know anyone in Huntsville, Alabama, and someone, actually an Iranian American, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm in Huntsville. I'd love to show you around." And I was like, "I don't know this person, but sure." And we met up, and we hung out for the next 4 days, and they were basically my de facto guide to the city.
Wow.
And there were many instances like that. And people just giving me tips. In Uzbekistan, there was someone who reached out to me. He was an Uzbek guy who was studying in South Korea, and he saw that I was there, and he was really excited, and I was like, "Okay, well, I'm in Tashkent, like, do you have any recommendations for places to eat?" And he gives me the name of a place, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm having trouble finding it." So he records a voice memo explaining where it is in Uzbek, so I could play it for a taxi driver.
Wow.
And then so I do that. Obviously, I don't know what he's saying, but I just play it for the taxi driver. The taxi driver's like, "Okay," takes me there, and then I'm messaging him. I'm like, "What do I order?" He records another voice memo of him ordering, and I play it for the server there. And there, of course, everyone working there is laughing because it's just such a hilarious circumstance. And it was an incredible meal. And someone who I'll probably never meet in person, but we've, talked since on Instagram because he was just so excited that I was there to write about Uzbekistan and wanted to make sure I had the best time. And I found that across the board, all over the world, was just the enthusiasm for people who know the place.
So how did you manage your social media accounts? This is a question that's come up time and time again, but also most recently with some of the work that Rukmini Kalimachi has done. Incredible threads on Twitter with her work in the Middle East. You were filing official reports, official articles. I'm assuming we're coming across Amy's desk at some point. But you were also posting to social media in between the published articles.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it was the people who were following me on Instagram kind of got a preview of sorts for the article because there was a delay from when I was in a place and when the article came out. But I was doing Instagram basically in real time. So on my stories at the end of every day, I'd kind of do a highlight reel of the day, basically. And it was more, it was the opportunity to be, because, we were also doing videos that were more produced and my photos, which were more composed, whatever the ones that I actually published. On Instagram story, it was a chance to just like be a little more casual, be like, give a sort of behind the scenes look to things.
Almost the real first draft of history.
Yeah, there you go.
Before the polished draft of history, if you will.
Yeah, and it was, it was like me hanging out with stray dogs or, things that don't necessarily make it into an article.
Except for the dog in
Siberia.
Pradnya is asking, did you do any cultural sensitivity training before?
I didn't. I didn't. I could see how that'd be helpful. I was lucky enough that the way I was raised, I was brought up, like we said earlier, between cultures. My father's Indian, my mother's Colombian. I grew up, because of my father's job, we moved every 4 or 5 years, always in international schools with kids from all over the world. So that was very much a part of the way I was educated and brought up anyway. But yeah, I could see that being very useful for sure.
And so in talking about all the social media work and you also mentioned some video work as well. Now, were you alone for the, and not in terms of, you were never alone when you were traveling, right? But in terms of you didn't have a cameraman with you, you didn't have a photographer with you, a producer. This was all you.
This was all me. Yeah, that's why when people ask, the first reaction to this is always, wow, like dream job. And 100% dream job, total dream. It's unbelievable, and I feel very grateful that I had the experience. Also, the hardest job I've ever had and ever will have. I mean, it was constant, no weekends, no days off.
Sure.
It was off a plane, get to work, and yeah, video. It was I had I had a GoPro, I had my phone with a selfie stick, I had my actual camera with a tripod, and I'd just be like, walking across an ice cave or frozen Lake Superior looking for ice caves, and I'd go like set up my tripod with the camera, then walk in front of it, and grab the tripod. I just had to be creative, doing it as a one-man team. Yeah.
You read my mind about my next question. What kind of equipment do you bring with you on this trip where you're traveling around the world? You said earlier you only stopped back in New York twice in over the year. What did you? I mean, this is one of the things that we talk about on the read along and the work that that Sree does on social media, giving advice and tips on gear and how you manage. How many chargers did you bring with you, for example?
I had it down to a science. So I timed it.
Please share the science with us.
I timed it a couple of times, and when you don't have any accountability when you're traveling alone, like my hotel room by the end of my time in a place was a disaster.
Sure.
Just hard drives everywhere, clothes everywhere, different piles. I timed it. It took me 7 minutes to pack everything up and get out the door.
7 minutes to pack.
7 minutes to get everything back in its place. Part of that was because I was just basically like at capacity the whole time, so I knew my bags were full. So if something wasn't full, I knew something was missing. My backpack. So I was with a carry-on backpack and a check-in suitcase. My backpack was approximately twice the weight allowance for planes.
You just accepted that every time?
And I only got busted twice.
Wow.
I think part of it was because it was a backpack. I just had it packed so densely that, if I walked up to the check-in counter with it on like one shoulder, it didn't look that heavy.
Sure.
So they wouldn't ask any questions. There were only it was twice. Once in Tahiti, because I was going on a tiny plane and they were like weighing me as well. So they were going to weigh my bag. And then once in Spain because the check-in agent was just having a bad day. But besides that, I got away with it. But yeah, so I had, the key to that was, for my backpack, I had like everything in its own kind of pouch.
Container, sure.
Yeah, so they have, there's places that sell these specialized like tech pouches, and I had
Yeah.
a couple of those where I could keep all my cords and hard
Yeah,
drives. But then I repurposed a lot of those like toiletry bags that you get at hotels or on planes.
Sure.
Or at least you used to.
When planes used to give you things
Exactly.
for free.
Yeah. Now it's just a bag of peanuts. But yeah, so I had like, all my audio equipment in one, my memory cards in another, my hard drives in another. So I knew everything had a home. And it meant that once everything was in its respective little bags, I was just putting like 4 things in my backpack instead of
Mm.
the 40
Sure,
things
makes
I was
sense.
traveling with. And the same went for my check-in luggage. So I've worked in travel journalism for a while, and as an editor, a lot of stories came across my desk about packing tips, and people would always talk about packing cubes, right?
Yeah.
Swear by them now. I was always like, oh, whatever. It's
Just
too
throw
much
it all
work.
in there.
Yeah, just throw it in
Yeah.
there. Life changing. Because again, I could have like all my t-shirts in one, and it would, they could like compress sort of as well. All my pants in another, all my socks in one, so everything had a place. And it was just so much easier to get it all packed up and out the door in, like I said, 7 minutes.
Sure. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And in terms of electronics.
Yeah, my bag, without every single airport around the world, my bag had to go into secondary screening because they'd look at the X-ray and they'd be like, "What is this?"
Sure.
Because it was just so dense. I had my laptop, I had 3 external hard drives, camera gear, 2 lenses, GoPros, selfie sticks. Like it was just packed to the brim with electronics. But that was also good too because there were 2 times that I was really busted and I had to like go buy a tote bag and rearrange things. There were other times where they'd be like, that looks a little too heavy. And I'd be like, well, it's just packed full of lithium ion batteries and that's not allowed to go in the
Sure. Underneath.
And then that just puts them in a situation where they're like, well, okay, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, because what else are they going to do? Just not let me bring, my camera?
Did showing a press credential or
No, I
New
didn't
York
even
Times
have to do
card
that. I
ever?
mean, I would say like obviously they could tell that I was doing something. I wasn't just a casual traveler with the amount of gear.
You
I
were
was
clearly
handling.
working.
So I'd be like, this is like my job. Like I can't do anything about this. And they'd be like, oh.
Victoria Bucher, one of the people watching, mentioned in reference to the story, a gentleman who was Uzbeki background recording the messages for you, is a great example of showing our humanity in terms of, you must have had several examples of that.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, it made me re-examine myself. Like when I meet a tourist in New York, my first thought isn't like, let me drop everything and help this person out. I mean, I'll help them if they're looking for directions, but like I had people in Denmark who I'd meet and then they'd take work off for the next 3 days to show me around, or complete strangers who drop everything to invite me to their house and introduce me to their family. And it's just like, I don't know, every day I was confronted by just how incredible people are.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's to that point of you're not really alone. So Francesca's actually asking a good question, and this actually might be a good transition to Amy. Francesca is watching on LinkedIn, and she's asking, were there any major differences or similarities between the 52 places? So I'm going to pose that more in terms of looking at the 2019 list, and then we'll use that as a segue to talk about the 2020 list and open up that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of within the 2019 list, at least from my perspective, Amy could probably talk about it more about how they mix up the selections. But from my perspective, it felt like it was either places that were a little more off the beaten path, including like incredibly remote, like, the Falkland Islands or Las Malvinas and Siberia. Or it was places that maybe were within a place that was well known, but it was something unexpected. So like I went to Denmark, but I didn't go to Copenhagen. I went to Aalborg, which is an industrial city in the north that's having this major kind of rebirth, cultural rebirth. Or it was places that are very well known, but I, went in trying to look for a different angle, like Las Vegas or, New Zealand in the South Island, but I was in a different part of the South Island than most people go to. So there was always kind of an unexpected angle to it. At least that's how I saw it. At least that's what I tried to dig into. Yeah, that's kind of how I saw the difference.
Great. So before we go to Amy, I'll just remind people that my name is Neil Parekh, and I am guest hosting today's Sunday New York Times Read Along, Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. He has been hosting the show for about 4 years now, and I am honored to serve as the guest host when he's not available and the executive producer of the show. We have a whole team of people that helps bring this to you every week. Paula Kiger is managing things on Facebook. Steve Taylor is managing things on LinkedIn, and Tim Sohn is joining us today to manage StreamYard for us. StreamYard is the app that we're using to multi-stream to 2 platforms and to show the graphics, etc. So thank you everyone for joining us. And again, this is an incredibly special edition of the New York Times Read Along, focusing on the 52 places list. We've just been talking to Sebastian Modak, who is the 52 Places 2019 traveler, talking about some of his experiences, sharing his tips for packing and gear and getting through airport security with twice the amount, twice the weight that you're supposed to. So we're thankful that he got through as many places. What I like to do is to bring on now Amy Virshup, who is the travel editor for the New York Times, and is gracious enough to have her have us in her home today. Amy, thank you for that.
Happy to have you guys.
So this is a big week for you, right?
Yeah, this is our biggest project of the year.
Yeah.
So
So when did you start planning for this week? When do you start planning the list for 2020?
So for this year, the week after Labor Day, I believe the date was September 9th. We went and had
September 9th to January 9th.
Exactly. Right? We took the whole Times travel team. We had Korean barbecue for lunch down in K-Town. And we asked the question, where would you go if you could go anywhere? And started from there.
And how many places did you have on your first draft of the list to get it down to 52?
I'm not really sure. It's pretty big. I mean, what we do is, so we had suggestions at that point. People had ideas to work on the travel desk. And then we go and we ask all the people who write for us. We send out a blast email to them and say, okay, what are your nominations for places to go? We also reach out to all the Times' foreign correspondents, their domestic correspondents. We ask, as we talk to people in the industry, you might imagine we get a lot of people who come in to talk to us about their destinations or send us email. Where would you go? We talk to people we know who travel a lot, and try to get all that into a big file and then start narrowing. So I'm not sure what the total number is.
And these are discussions, arguments, debates.
A little bit of
how
all
many
those
synonyms
things.
can we come up with?
Exactly, a little bit of all those things. And we try to. So the real question that we're trying to answer is, why now? So it's not like what are 52 great places to go, because there are various places on that list every year. But like, why would I go to that place in this coming year? What makes it special? What makes it a must do for 2020? So we're always trying to look at, okay, so what's changed, what's new, what's different this year that would put that place on the list. So for example, in 2019, we put Hong Kong on the list. And we put Hong Kong on the list because of the new infrastructure connecting it to the Chinese mainland, which actually we said, could change Hong Kong in ways that we didn't imagine. Of course, we never imagined that Hong Kong would be taken over by, would be taken up in protest the way it has been.
Sure.
And Sebastian actually landed in the middle of that.
Wow.
So, but it's always, okay, what's new that is making us want to go to a certain place?
How Pradnya is asking, how big is the travel team at the New York Times?
There are about 8 of us who are full-time on the desk who do various things. Some of those people, the Times is set up, this maybe getting a little more in the weeds than people want to. So I have a designer who designs the print section for us. He's part of the travel team, but he doesn't actually. He works for the art department.
Sure,
So,
sure.
but
With Wayne and others.
but together there are about 8 of us.
Sure. And then freelancers and photographers and writers that will submit the 36 hours
Right.
on a
Right.
regular basis, 36 hours in a particular city, for example.
Yeah. So most of the coverage that we run is freelance written. Some of it's written by Times correspondents, which is wonderful. I love that. But a lot of it is freelance.
And I'm going to also look. I know there's another question from our colleague Mark Lee. What was that? They said, were there any stops? In the Carolinas. So why don't we could jump into the list and start talking about it. And I know that Tim has a copy of the list that we can share on the screen, hopefully. And we have the print edition here. So one of the things that we'd like to do is highlight the print edition of the New York Times and kind of show how it's shown. He's showing the 52 places to go on the screen right now. So I'm going to come around here. I'll flip the camera so you can actually see what we can do with StreamYard. Sebastian, if you want to come over here as well. So we're showing what's on the website in a screen share. And I think I have, if you can lean in, Sebastian, if we get you in the camera right on, there we go. That's you. Cool. So we can at least show the visuals, which are really impressive. This is one of those examples where there are pros and cons to both print and digital. Right. You can do some great things online. You can also show the paper and show how impressive the list is there. So let's take a look at the paper and go through the list. We have Washington. Now, that's Washington, D.C., not Washington State,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
And why was it the first?
So Washington is on for a combination of things. One is, as you can see from the photograph, it's a historic photograph of suffragists. And we chose Washington in part for history, and it's the 100th anniversary of women achieving a vote in the United States. So we wanted to highlight that. And we also wanted to say in a contentious election year, Washington is all of our capital. It does not belong to any one person, any one party, and it's the capital of our country. It's also an incredibly interesting, vibrant immigrant city. It is a majority minority city, and has amazing food that only gets better. So got it on the list.
And I'm going to ask a style question. Washington without the DC?
Yes, that is New York Times style.
The New York Times. It's not AP, right?
No,
it's New York Times style.
New York Times style, and when there's the possibility of ambiguity, you add the DC. The feeling was our print desk here that there was no ambiguity, so we went with just Washington.
Having lived in Seattle for 15 years in what's affectionately known as the other Washington, I'm sure there are at least some folks who might wonder about that. I looked at it myself. I live in Washington, D.C. now. And I looked at the list and was wondering, is Washington State the #1 place on the list? That's interesting. Clearly, and there was some thought of Seneca Falls.
Yes.
You want to honor the 100th anniversary
right.
of the women's suffrage.
Right.
Seneca Falls was a possibility.
Yes.
Right.
From the Seneca Falls Declaration, but we decided to go with Washington.
Sure. Great. So let's switch to the print edition, so we can show off a little bit about what we did in print, and so you can see in terms of the layout here on the left-hand side, we have three places with pictures, and it looks like 4 items: British Virgin Islands, Bolivia, and Greenland. There were 2 specific I want to say criteria, but themes for the list this year, right?
Right.
We started with history, focusing on Washington, Greenland. That's in part of the focus was on sustainability, right?
Exactly, yeah. And there are a number of places that are on here for sustainability issues. And in fact, I would say, even the British Virgin Islands, which is the second one that you see there, the reason they're on the list is because of their comeback from the 2017 hurricanes that hit them with a 1-2 punch. And I think there we're also talking about climate change and sustainability and what's going to happen to places that are increasingly endangered. And Greenland, incredible landscape and threatened by climate change, but also on the positive side, more accessible. They're actually building new airports in Greenland, so more people will be able to go there. So it's kind of and that is a question: what's going to happen?
Part of it is go now before it gets overrun.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
I was glad to see Greenland on it because actually, remember you asked me if I had any ideas, any pitches. I never got around to sending you anything. I'm sorry. It was a busy time.
I was going to ask that question, Sebastian. Did you were you too busy traveling to influence this year's list?
I didn't have time to think it through or write up anything. But Greenland was going to be one of the ones I was going to pick. I went there 2 years ago. It's just unbelievably stunning. And yeah, the threats of climate change are very real. You hear it from the people living there. So I was glad to see that one.
So Jonathan Borstein, one of our regulars, is commenting, my problem in a future article is going to be trying to sort, there's a discussion between suffragists
Yes.
and suffragettes,
Yes.
right? And I saw that someone else, I think it was Phyllis, made a comment earlier about thank you for getting it right. I'm sure that you got it right. I can only hope that I got it right as well when I was.
What's the distinction?
Well, the it's.
Yes, is it goes against the very idea.
Yeah, and it has a certain kind of diminutive tone to it.
Right.
And suffragists, it's more.
And Phyllis is saying it's actually a US UK difference. That in the US it's suffragists.
In
the UK it's suffragettes in terms of the preferred term. I won't make any comments about why the UK might be using suffragettes. But Jonathan's making a comment when you write and you have a global audience, or if you're writing something, not so much in terms of the Times having a global audience, because you do have a home that you would refer to, but if something that's UK based, it can make it challenging. A similar thing comes up when you're talking about First Nations and Indigenous peoples. If you're talking about with the US, I think people are getting beyond the phrase of Native Americans, but when you're close to the border, First Nations is the term of art in Canada that people are much more familiar with.
Right. I mean, we are conscious, I would say, though, that we serve a global audience. I find myself, sometimes in a first draft of something, you'll write that either very New York or very American in its terminology, and then sometimes you have to rethink that and say, wait, if I were reading this in London or Buenos Aires, does it feel really too parochial? Rethink what terminology is.
I remember you caught in a couple of times in my copy, I think, because of I went to Australia for a few years. My dad's Indian, which is Commonwealth, so I'll spell color OU randomly at times and things like that.
Do you really?
Yeah, it just happens. I don't know, it's just the way because I was just brought up between all these different cultures and teachers from different parts of the world and whatever. And I remember Amy caught a few of them in my copy. We
actually had a big debate. This is a little off topic, but when he was filing from Australia, it was like, summer has started in Australia.
Yeah.
And it was like December 8th or something. And I was like, wait, how's that possible? Summer starts, not summer, the season, it was possible for summer, but
solstice
the season doesn't start until the solstice, the 21st. And it was like, no, in Australia, it starts
December 1st.
That's interesting.
So the definition of what is summer or winter, actually, here we go by the solstice, there they go by first.
You can certainly,
it was a global education for me.
You can make that mental leap to summer being in December. It's just the start.
It was the actual start date. It was like, isn't it based on doesn't have to do with the celestial calendar.
So we have a question coming in from LinkedIn. For either of you, what would be, from your point of view, the most relevant trend in tourism, in the tourism industry for 2020? Is it ecotourism? Is that still the focus? Is it solo traveling, which your year was all about solo traveling?
So I'm going to say not ecotourism, but there's a term that I'm thinking of right now, which is kind of conscious tourism.
Mm.
And the idea that, obviously, I think in the last year, climate change and travel's contribution to climate change has really come to the forefront of a lot of people's thinking. And, as a travel editor, it's obviously something I'm trying to wrestle with. Okay? Travel burns up a lot of carbon. How do we justify that? How do we think about that? And so I think what we are going to focus on a lot is how, as the travel section, do we travel consciously, and how do we help people travel consciously? What choices are they going to make about where they go, where they stay, what airline they travel on, how they behave, all those kinds of things to try and make travel as sustainable as it can be. I mean, and there are certainly people who say, well, you should just never get on an airplane again. And if that's the choice you're going to make, I understand that. But I also think that, like, listening to Sebastian talk about his connection to people, like, I really would hate to give that up. Have the Iranian people who are, oh, please come to my country. Like, I think to just give up those connections would be a real loss. Not to mention, the incredible beauty, the ruins that are around the world, the different cultures that people can experience. Like, to just say, I'm never going to go and see that, or you should never go and see that, I think is not a decision that I would say people should make. But I do think they need to think about how.
I think it was Vogue Italy that came out with a special edition of their magazine, this current issue, where they have no photographs. It's the first time that they've ever had an edition without photographs. They decided not to do any photo shoots. All of the illustrations is artwork, and they specifically did a calculation. What is the carbon footprint for traveling to various locations, for setting up gear and running electricity and food and waste, etc., to reduce their carbon footprint. I know that for this year, for 2020, the New York Times has made the decision not to have a traveler following in Jada and Sebastian's footsteps to cover all these 52 places. Was the carbon footprint at all part of that discussion, or was it based on other factors?
It was always supposed to be a special project. It was never like, we're going to do this in perpetuity, as long as we exist as the New York Times. So that was really I think the major driving part of it. But definitely the carbon footprint is something we thought about. We did buy carbon offsets. Starting mid-year, we made a decision that we should carbon offset. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So the full second half of the year, we bought carbon offsets for Seb, and we also are buying all staff travel for the New York Times, the travel desk.
For the travel desk.
So anybody who's on staff for travel from the travel desk, we carbon offset.
Interesting. So let's take a look at the rest of the list kind of as a whole, and then we'll get back to the paper and see how we've laid it out. Because there's some really great photography, and I know there's some great digital features as well. So the list itself, and I don't know if you'll be able to read it. I've got it on my screen here, and Tim might be able to get this list on his screen as well. We have, so we covered Greenland, the Kimberley region in Australia comes in. Now, is the order significant at all? Is it?
No, although people out there do, like, we're number 2,
Right.
we're number 4, or whatever, which we love that people around the world react to this and get into it. But after number 1, it's basically, we have to put them in some order.
It's some order. So we have Paso Robles, California, Sicily, Salzburg, Austria, Tokyo, Caesarea, Israel, national parks in China as a whole, Lesotho, Colorado Springs, Krakow, Poland, Jodhpur, India, which made the cover, Western Sweden, Egypt, where I lived for 2 years back in 03 to 05, La Paz, Mexico, Grand Isle, Louisiana, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Norway, the Bahamas, Kampot, Cambodia, Christchurch, New Zealand, the scene of a horrific shooting last year, and an earthquake as well, right? Asturias, Spain. British Columbia. How do you pronounce?
Haida Gwaii.
Haida Gwaii, in British Columbia. I figured you have had some practice saying that. Austin, Texas made the list. Sabah, Malaysia. So 2 places in Malaysia. Churchill, Manitoba. Uganda, Paris, Lake District, England, Tajikistan. Antakya, Turkey. Leipzig, Germany. Lima, Peru. Molise, Italy. Copenhagen. Richmond, Virginia. Mount Kenya. Menorca, Spain. Germany.
Oh, we're on the ground.
Thank you. I was going to slide right over that one, but Sebastian, were you able to pronounce all the cities on your list? Did you have to go through some practice?
A couple I had to look up before I landed. Yeah.
You don't want to look too much like a tourist when
Right.
you. Plymouth, England, I can pronounce, so that's good. Atlantic Forest, Brazil. Belle-Île, Belle-Île, France. Val d'Aran, Spain. Mongolia. Juliana Trail in Slovenia, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Transylvania Alps, Romania, Urbino, Italy, and rounding out the list, not necessarily last, because the order didn't matter on the list, but the place that was tweeted by Senator John Tester, Glacier National Park in Whitefish, Montana. So it is an interesting mix of U.S. Destinations and international. Looking at the list as a whole, how does that compare with the list that you had, Sebastian? How much overlap? Is it different cities? I mean, there are only so many countries out there, right? So there's going to be some over the last. How many years have you been doing the 52 places list?
Well, the travel section started doing some version of places to go in the coming year in about 2006. Not sure if that was totally correct, but did not pick a numbered list until maybe around 2010. And then the number kind of bounced around. It was like 30, 35. And then I think in about 2014, we settled in on 52 places.
And
it's been 52 ever since.
And when you're looking at your planning for the list after having reviewed the full list for this year, do you have them all on a spreadsheet and you kind of look to see, okay, have we gone to this country? How many times have we gone to this country? Have we hit this city before?
Yes.
Should we go back there?
Yes, actually, we did not have them on the spreadsheet until this year.
So we're on the same page, right?
We put them on a spreadsheet this year, and it's always you're trying to balance. There should be some places that are brand new. There should be some places people know that are great cities that have a reason to go to. We do try not to repeat too much. My photo editor, Phaedra Brown, has been doing the list. I think this was her 4th year, maybe 5th. And she has an amazing, she was our institutional memory.
She does it by memory.
And she's like, no, we've been there before.
Wow.
Yeah.
But we do now have the spreadsheet.
Sure.
It's comparing the lists. I mean, there's definitely more of a focus on like sustainability this year, which is great. But it's interesting to see like some of the same regions hit, but in different ways, right? So like I went to Uzbekistan this time. Tajikistan's on the list. Which I'd love to go to. That whole region fascinates me. Or like last for my list it was in sub-Saharan Africa. It was 2 spots in West Africa. This time it's 2 spots in East Africa, right? Mount Kenya, Addis Ababa, and Lesotho. And Uganda, right? So there's a lot of places. It's interesting just to see the reasons why sometimes the same region, but it's a different place. But yeah, it's got me thinking about places to go. Maybe after a couple of weeks.
Is that what this issue is supposed to do? Get people to think about where to
Sure,
go?
yeah, no,
I guess it worked, right?
it's a mixture of fantasy. Wow, what a cool place!
Yeah.
I'd love to go there.
Yeah.
Probably won't, but and inspiration. I should go there. Aspirational. It can be for the armchair traveler. It can be for somebody who actually wants to get up and go.
Or we can travel. The armchair traveler, kind of live vicariously through the New York Times reporters.
Right.
We have a question from LinkedIn for Sebastian. So, did you confront or contend with any of your own biases or assumptions during your travel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tried to very consciously not come in with expectations for a place, because I found that's just a better way to find a story. And I think one of the biggest things I learned this year was like being very conscious of your own ignorance about a place can lead to the best stories. Because if you go in thinking you already know something, it's going to cloud whatever else you find out. And honestly, you probably don't know anything compared to people who have been living there and known it their whole life. So that was a big part of kind of getting the psychology that I'd use when I was traveling. But there were still some, biases that crept through. I have never, before this year, I've never had any desire to go to Las Vegas. It's just like not my style of travel, or at least I thought it wasn't.
I've been there and I can agree.
But I mean, I ended up finding something really incredible about it. I was on like my 4th day there and was honestly this was early in the trip too, right? So I was trying to make a good impression with my stories. But on like my 4th day,
You weren't doing that later in the trip, right?
It was muscle memory by the end of the trip. At that point, I was very conscious of it all, and it was like my 4th day of 5 days or something, and I was like, I got nothing. I have nothing. I have no story. I have like nothing unique to tell about this place. Every story's been already told. And then through meeting a bunch of strangers, I like came across this community of mostly Mexican Americans who live in this one neighborhood that are all like model homes from the 1950s. They dress like it's the 1950s. They play in rockabilly bands, and all the decorations in their house are straight out of like 1955. There's these people who like live in a time warp, and they just took me in and showed me an incredible time, and took me to all of the like old dive bars in Las Vegas and diners that haven't changed in 50 years. And I was like, oh, there is something here. So it was proof of two things. It was proof that you really need to leave your expectations at the door if you're going to open yourself up to these experiences. But it was also proof to me, at least, that like literally everywhere has something that can blow your mind if you look hard enough.
Sure.
Even Las Vegas.
even Las Vegas. Mark Lee is asking, how does one get picked to be the traveler? And have there been, travelers from various ethnic, gender, and age groups? We've only had 2 travelers so far.
Right.
So there's gender balance, at least, Jada and Sebastian, and some ethnic diversity. I don't know Jada's background offhand. I think Asian.
Yeah, she's
American?
She's
part Asian American, and Sebastian is part Indian and part Colombian. So I'd say that's pretty good in terms of balance. And we talked earlier about how Sebastian's background, you were raised with a cultural sensitivity anyway, so it really helped you in your travels. Can you talk a little bit? I know that we won't have a 2020 traveler. But just back to that selection process, what were you looking for in a traveler when you were doing the interview process and the selection process?
So
how did we get so lucky to have Sebastian?
Right. So there was actually a regular. I didn't take part in the first selection process.
Sure.
But and I think it was pretty much the same. But so in the second year, what you had to do was you had to fill out an application. And then at a certain point, you had to submit an Instagram story that you had created. You had to shoot a video, and you had to give a writing sample and a photography. So I think that was everything, right?
Yeah.
And then we went through those and pared those down. So we needed people who had all the skills. So there's a selection committee, and we went through all the all those, various media forms that people had submitted and judge them.
Great, great. Lisa Lenoir is asking on Facebook, for Sebastian, what was your process for onboarding yourself once you arrived in a new place?
Yeah, I would, usually the first day in each place, I wouldn't leave my hotel room because I'd be on deadline. So I'd get to a place, I'd spend the first day writing about the last place, basically, because I kind of wanted to get that part of my brain, stored away so that I could then open it up for the next place. Usually I would try to, my first day, I wouldn't, or the first day after writing, so I guess my second day, I wouldn't have much of an agenda. I would just like go for a very long walk, and kind of just get my bearings, try to understand, try to get an initial impression. Then I would usually try to hit kind of just like the top spots, the well-known spots, get like the main attractions out of the way. And then usually by then I would have met somebody or like found out about some other neighborhood that someone, had told me about. And I would just take it from there. It was very much improvising. There wasn't a one size fits all package besides that kind of routine of spending one day organizing photos and writing and spending in media, and then one day just kind of going on an arbitrary random walk to see what happens. But from there, taking it as it comes.
Yeah.
But there was always I always felt like I needed to be doing something. Which is again, what I said earlier, it was a dream job, also really hard because I just felt there was pressure to like, it was like fear of missing out, but on steroids. I just always felt like if I wasn't doing something, I was going to miss something that could make part of the story. So I was going to sleep super late and waking up super early every day. There was only one day that I can recall where I really just was like, I can't do anything today. I was in Scotland, in Aberdeen. It was pouring rain, as I want to do in Scotland. And I was just exhausted. I'd taken like an overnight train the night before where I hadn't really slept much. And it was pouring, and I spent the entire day in my hotel bathrobe watching like British reality television. I needed it. I needed it. It was perfect.
Wait,
it was
wait.
Exactly what I needed.
Breaking news, folks. I think we have some breaking news, worth a banner headline. Sebastian Modak is human. I was having my doubts hearing about these stories, only stopping back in the US twice, day in, day out, no breaks. Yeah. Did you get, and you didn't, what about getting sick? All that airline travel and the late nights and.
One cold, and it was my third to last stop.
One
fourth
cold.
To last stop was in Tahiti of all places.
Sick in Tahiti.
Yeah.
I can just see the email now. Dear Amy, I am sick. I happen to be in Tahiti. I will check in later.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't understand it either. No stomach bugs.
Really?
One cold for 3 days. I really do think it was pure adrenaline. My body was like, you cannot get sick because you'll fall behind on everything.
And the food that you were eating that was different.
I was eating everything.
The different bugs that you were exposed to. I mean, as someone who's
12 days on an airplane in total, and I didn't get sick, which is crazy.
Having
those things are just petri dishes.
Lived overseas, you're not used to the germs in another country. Myself, having gone to India and living in Egypt, it takes a while to adjust. The water is different. People have immunities that you don't have, and
I can't explain it. I really do think it was my body just being like, putting everything forward and saying we're going to hold out as much as possible, and then Tahiti came around and it thought I was done, and it wasn't.
Amy, he might not be human. I'm not sure. It really is. So that a lot of times for others, when you have a big event, when you have a conference or finals, your body holds it together until you're done.
Yeah.
You were holding it together for a year. You came home. Did you spend the first week in bed? Just
I've done a little bit of math. I think I was probably sleeping maybe like an average of 6 hours a night for the past year. Since I've been back, it's been on average 13.
Good for you.
So some people say like catching up on sleep is not a thing, that you can't really catch up on it. I think you can. I think I'm.
And you didn't have him on deadline for that first week back, right? You weren't pushing him.
No, he was on deadline because he had to write his wrap-up piece.
His wrap-up piece.
Yeah.
Once you were done with that, you're good.
But then he's got another piece in the paper today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the Times. those of you who get the print paper,
Yes,
page 2,
in the front page. Oh, the Times Insider
it's
piece.
the Times Insider piece he wrote about.
Let's take a look
a
at that.
ritual that he created of sending a postcard home from every place.
That's right. I saw that on Twitter that you
Yeah,
wrote
it's
about
right
that.
there.
So this is the piece, Greetings from Everywhere, with the cut line for Sebastian Modak, the Times 52 Places Traveler. In 2019, writing postcards was a moment to set aside deadlines and think. He sent one home from each destination he visited. 48 made it. 4 people didn't get their postcards.
Well, 3 because 51 because Iran wasn't on the list.
Or
so-
51, that's right. So
yeah.
you only made, so you were the 51 places
These are-
traveler.
Yeah,
these are-
exactly.
yeah.
I think we have a branding issue that we have to
I'm
work on.
forever the 52 places traveler with an asterisk.
With an asterisk, exactly.
These were actually just the ones I sent back to my partner in New York.
Oh, okay.
In total, I sent like 145 postcards.
Okay, so you're just thinking about the ones you sent home
Because
effectively.
now they're like my only souvenir. I wasn't collecting things obviously when I was traveling so much.
But
So-
you did get some gifts along the way.
I
A
did,
T-shirt, a
very
jersey, a
strange
flag,
things.
a key.
Like a key to a society in Aalborg, Denmark that I'm now a member of. This old woman in Italy wrote me a poem about her favorite horse. A lot of strange things collected
Yeah.
along the way.
And where did you have space for all that? If you're
I
bags?
mailed some stuff back.
Mailing
along
stuff
the
home,
way,
okay.
including some paintings that a Croatian artist who I met gave me, and those never made it home, unfortunately. But 48 of 51. The 3 that didn't make it was one from Italy, one from Hong Kong.
you have to put the zip code on the addresses, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one from Los Angeles. Right?
Interesting. Interesting. So let's go back, Amy. Let's dig back into the list. It's
Okay.
as a time check, it's 9:42. We do try and finish by 10 o'clock.
Okay.
We want to be respectful of everyone's mornings. And so we were taking a look at the list. And again, I want to focus on the print version, because when you look at the layout, I mean, this is, again, there's some great things that you can see online, but on print, you see this great picture. This is Salzburg, obviously. This is Paso Robles, California. This is a display where there are lights.
Yeah, this
in
is
the
a
fields,
light
right?
installation in Paso Robles by an artist named Bruce Monroe, and it just looks so astounding. That's one of the major reasons it made our list.
And one of the online, one of the features that it shows the different colors of the
Yeah.
lights that change. Here is this is Israel, Caesarea, Israel, ancient ruins.
Yep.
Which are really really impressive. We have the China National Parks, China, and Soto, and then Krakow, Poland, Colorado Springs, Jodhpur, India, Western Sweden, and Egypt. Egypt is on the list this year.
Yeah, now Egypt was a contender last year and almost made it on for the same reason. They are building a big new museum there that has a lot of actually the Tut relics. And they didn't get it built last year, and so we're hoping this year seemed closer to actual completion. So we'll see if it makes it.
Maybe this will give them the extra push to
Yeah,
to
but
wrap up.
Egypt is not the only place that has trouble meeting deadlines. I want to point out that Los Angeles was on our list this year. For the main driver was for the new movie museum. I'm forgetting.
Academy Museum.
Yeah, it's the Academy Museum.
Academy of Arts,
Yeah, so it's
Motion
devoted
Picture.
Motion Picture
right,
Association.
Motion
Okay.
Pictures Museum. And so it made the list because of that museum, which was supposed to open in June.
I think so, yeah. But now this is also like the 5th time they've moved it in June.
And
Yeah.
so it has yet to open.
So some of the work that you're doing is you're trying to make a judgment call of whether or not a location is going to have the new feature, the new airport, the new what have you,
Right.
in time for this year or not, and you're taking an educated guess as best you
Yes.
can.
Right. So, Colorado Springs is on in part for a new Paralympics museum that's we think going to open. So Colorado Springs, get your act together.
Phyllis is asking, going back to Sebastian, when did you let strangers know you were a reporter?
Yeah, it's a good question. Usually, when I first introduced myself, I wouldn't. I'd just say I was someone traveling alone. That was usually enough to have them open up and start giving me tips. It was really only if I really got to know them, or if I wanted to quote them in some way, that I'd then say, by the way, I'm actually doing this thing. But it wouldn't be like my opening line, because I was worried that if I said it to somebody, I don't know, they'd have a restaurant or something that they'd want. They'd be like, oh, you got to go to my uncle's restaurant, because then maybe it'll be written in the New York Times, which I was trying to make genuine connections, right?
That'll happen in Egypt, trust me.
That'll happen anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And so I tried to make sure it was just kind of and that was enough. Usually people are like, oh, you're a solo traveler here in the middle of, Bukhara, Uzbekistan. What are you doing here? Come meet my brother. Let's go have dinner,
So the friends you made were genuine. It wasn't just, I'm the 52 places traveler.
Right, yeah. Eventually, usually that would come out, because they'd be like, wait, why do you have all this gear? Why are you taking photos of everything?
Yeah.
But at least at the beginning, if I met someone at a bar, I wouldn't be like, hi, I work for the New York Times. What's your name?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
There's a great picture here, and again, this to me is the power of print, to have such a dominant photo going across the page. This is from the Bahamas,
Right.
and this is in the same realm. The two themes for this year, history and sustainability, right? The Bahamas falls in that latter
Right.
category.
Part of the Bahamas was badly hit by hurricane earlier in 2019. In fact, most of the Bahamas was not, and they are a place that's heavily.
And this is a question that's coming in: did over-tourism enter the discussions in terms of helping raise awareness of sustainability?
Absolutely. We're trying to pick maybe some places that are less visited in order to spread out the burden. Actually, the Slovenia, the trail that we do in Slovenia, that's actually one of the country is known as a green tourism destination. They're very conscious of kind of balancing tourism. And this is an attempt to get people to go to a different part of their country, kind of spread out the visitation so it's not all in one place. I mean, I can remember, Seb went to Zadar this year, and Croatia used to be a little visited place, and Zadar certainly has become quite overrun. And so one of the questions is, how do you balance that?
This picture, I think, is just phenomenal. This is of the Northern Lights in Manitoba.
Yeah, Churchill.
In Churchill, one of the places on this year's list. You actually went to Norway.
I went to
recently,
Norway.
right?
Yes, I went to Norway just recently, a couple of weeks ago, to try and see the Northern Lights. I did see them, not quite as not like that.
Well, you may have seen them on. I'd love to see your pictures later to see how well. Now, when you went there, I mean, does the travel editor ever go anywhere as a regular citizen, or are you always the travel editor and always working?
Well, I'm always, thinking while I'm traveling, but I was not actually writing anything. This was a trip that I had wanted to see the Northern Lights, and now I want to go back and see them in Churchill, because you can actually take a train to Churchill, which is pretty great.
And polar bears, right?
And polar bears. They did not have polar bears. I was in Tromsø, and loved it. And spent a day in Oslo, and loved Oslo. So, and I definitely had ideas that I was thinking about as I was there. But it was a personal trip.
Travel editors can be real people too.
Yeah.
And just travel.
Yeah.
So Frederick is asking. He's just making he's making a comment. Which is a critical comment. Sustainable tourism is an oxymoron, like fair colonialism or tolerant intolerance. Is sustainable tourism something that is attainable?
Well, I mean, I think it's something to strive for. I have to say, in a place, let's talk about the Bahamas. Now, you could say they have a problem that their economy is so dependent on tourism, and I do think that's true. On the other hand, if everybody just stopped going to the Bahamas, that would be a major problem for the people there. There are many, many people who have jobs, whose livelihoods depend on tourism, and I think to just pull out and say, okay, we're never going to the Bahamas again, would be a problem, for them as well. So I think you have to balance those questions, how you could have a place that does get visited, but is not deformed by it.
Yeah, and I think also it goes back to what Amy was talking about earlier about being like a conscious travel too, right? It's the way you travel once you're there.
Conscious travel.
Yeah, it's the it's the way you travel once you're there. That's also gonna contribute to whether to the sustainability factor of that trip. I think there's by staying with in a small family-run local hotel, maybe you're helping out more than staying at some big chain that's going straight to some big hotel conglomerate or whatever. And there's little things you can do, the way you interact, and like Amy said, a lot of these places, the economy does depend on tourism. So is the answer really to stop traveling? I'm not sure.
And I know from my ties and experience with Egypt, after the revolution, when tourism just stopped, the economy just collapsed. And it's built back up a little bit, hopefully, and with the museum and with being on the list, it could come back up. But that is a huge issue.
Or the same thing was I lived in Indonesia when I was in high school, and in Bali after the Bali bombings.
At the bombings.
It was like people were struggling, really struggling. Regular people in Bali. Obviously now it's swung so far that it's in the realm of over tourism probably. But at the time it was, you'd go there and people were like really struggling because it was such a economy that was held up.
And if I remember correctly, Frederick is actually from Goa, India. He watches from Goa every time. Have you been to Goa,
I have.
Sebastian?
It's been a long time. I was
Yeah.
a kid when I went there, so I'm not sure what it's like now.
I was there in, I think, 2001 myself.
Okay.
So it's been a while. This picture is from Uganda.
Yeah.
And I just want to show again the layout, right? I mean, you can't, unless you had just a full 2-page spread, this is about as big as you can get with the picture. You said you have an art director on the travel side.
Yes, Rodrigo Honeywell is our.
Rodrigo. So shout out to Rodrigo
Yeah.
for overseeing this issue,
Yep.
certainly. And so we have Uganda, Paris is on the list, Lake District, England, Tajikistan as well. And then here, again, another interesting picture. It's Leipzig, Germany. The once dreary industrial city now has a thriving club, restaurant, and gallery scene. I assume you did a little partying while you were
A little bit.
out there on your travels.
Part of the job. It's
Part
of
of
the
it,
job.
it was you were told to party. Catherine Banks is asking on LinkedIn, will either of you be at the New York Times Travel Show next week?
Both of us will
We
be.
both will be at the New York Times Travel Show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would assume so, right?
Yep.
And I think I saw some social media posts about that as
Yeah.
well.
And we'll both be doing panels.
Sure. And of course we can put it on the record somewhere that now you were on, was it New York One with Jamie
Yes.
earlier in the week?
Yep.
And then the New York Times read along this weekend. What other
And I'm
interviews?
going to say that at New York One, Danielle Pergamon wrote the Paso Robles, California
Oh, really?
item for us, and her sister Annika Pergamon is on New York One in the morning.
That's
So
right. I remember
it
seeing
was
that.
really fun.
Sure, sure. What
Got to
other
meet her.
major interviews or appearances have you had so far?
I was on Cheddar.
Cheddar, yeah.
On Friday,
Online TV.
Online TV. And that's it for the moment. I'm sure there'll be more as we get closer to the travel show.
Right.
And it's gonna now went out of my head.
Sure. Sebastian, what about you? Lying low after your
No, I've done a
wrap
couple
up
of
piece?
interviews. There's some upcoming, I think, like profile type pieces coming out. I did a radio interview for RN World Travel, it's called, the travel show, and something else that I'm also forgetting.
It's all a blur.
Oh,
all
I
a
know
blur.
what I was going to say is actually a little bit of a tangent, but in the plugging world here, we actually are doing a book.
Oh,
of
really?
the 52 places list for the first time ever.
Okay.
The New York Times, store will have a book that you can buy.
For the 2020 list
for
or
the
looking back?
2020 list.
For the 2020 list.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
So like these articles
these articles, these
these
photographs,
previews.
put into book form.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. We'll look forward to sharing that. The rest of the list: Turkey, Molise, Italy, Copenhagen, Richmond, Virginia, Leipzig. We mentioned Lima, Peru. Um, Again, this shot here. Again, looking at the choices that we make with art and layout. This is from France. The Paulins Lighthouse sits on the northern tip of the French island off the coast of Brittany. Um, so this
Right,
is
that's Belle Ile.
Belle Ile.
There's actually, that's a different photo from what we have online, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So why? How is that? Was that just a? Where was the choice between that? It's not a one-to-one.
Right, it's not, they're not always one-to-one, and that's a decision. Rodrigo sometimes felt that an alternate photo would better capture the place for print, so he used those.
Interesting, interesting. So Mount Kenya, Menorca, Spain, Germany, the city.
Oberammergau.
Say it again.
Oberammergau.
Oberammergau.
The Oberammergau, this is a history one. They have a passion play that they have been doing.
That's right. Every 10
10
years.
years. And this, it's, and if you actually did the math, I forget the year that it actually started.
40. It was like the 42nd.
But I think we're on the 42nd.
Right.
At some point, they changed the cadence.
The timing or something. The
right.
math doesn't work out from when they started
Right, to be
to.
exactly every
Sure.
10 years.
Sure.
But yeah, I think this is the 42nd one. And they started doing it in association with the plague. If God saved them from the plague, they would do this
As a
ritual.
penance.
Yeah.
Ritual.
Yeah.
Celebration.
Yeah.
All in one.
Yeah.
Plymouth, England, Atlantic Forest, Brazil, and again, Belle Ile, France. And then closing out the list, Mongolia with the dominant picture on this page. Just a great shot of the sky. Val d'Aran, Spain. We have Juliana Trail, Slovenia, you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This great shot here. And then Transylvanian Alps, Urbino, Italy, and Glacier National Park in Whitefish, Montana. The rest of the travel section features Sebastian's mother. Hi, Mom. So this is the Sebastian's year in review. So this was online Monday,
Yes.
but held for the print edition today. And we always make a note of that. One of the things with the read along is that it is a celebration of the New York Times and print journalism. But we make it a point to try and note the variances in terms of what's available online, what's available in print, what the layout and the headings, subheads, etc. So it's always interesting to see how that plays out. We have a house ad for New York Times Journeys. What will you discover in 2020? I would argue that the whole section is a what will you discover in 2020 list. But some interesting tours with Times staffers, former Times staffers. I guess a few more as well. Sure, it's beginning of the year, so we can see that. And then, so there was another. This is a continuation of your piece, and then Amy, your piece on how this list came together.
Right.
At the end, and we talked about some of that earlier. So yeah, I think a fitting last question. Phyllis is asking Sebastian, what is next for you? Now that once you get 52 Places 2019 out of your system,
yeah,
you're looking for a job, right?
I'm really not sure. Yeah, I guess I should. It was strange.
You might want to work on that resume.
Yeah. I had my last day at the Times this past week. And handed in my laptop, everything, all the gear. When I was leaving, it honestly felt like I had retired. Like it wasn't the end of a job. Like this year was so intense, and the lead up to the end and everything was so intense in my mind that like when I finished, I was like, cool, I'm like done. And I woke up on Thursday morning and I was like, I have nothing to do today. So I'm just gonna ride that feeling for a little bit. I'm trying to give myself basically the rest of January off to process it all and start thinking about what's next. So I wish I had a more satisfying answer. I don't know yet. It definitely will involve travel in some capacity, probably not the intensity of this year.
It would be hard to top
Yes,
this
it
year.
would. But first, just a little break on my to-do list.
Amy, this is your big issue for the year, right?
Yeah.
After this, it's all downhill, or what do you do now?
Yeah, no, we finish it. We've really been focused on this very, very heavily for the past 4 months, and then we published everything in it, and they were like, "Oh my God, we got to do next week."
You still have a section to put out
We
every
still
week,
have,
and
52
36
more of
hours.
these to do for the rest of the year.
And now you have to find individual people to go out and tell these stories. You don't have one sucker. I mean, a reporter going around doing the work.
Right, and we will go to a number of them. I mean, obviously, we think they're worth visiting in 2020, so we'll be visiting some of them. I mean, one of the things is, if you looked at the comments on our online, we did get a lot of comments on, how can you put out this list? Climate change. And one of the things about the list that you have to remember is that we are a global news organization. So not everyone is reading this list in New York City and saying, I'm going to get on a plane here. Some people are reading this list in London and saying, no, I'll go to the Lake District. I'll go to Plymouth. And some people are reading it, in Beijing. Some people are reading it in South America. So it's not in every case we're seeing.
So we have hit the 10 o'clock hour, and we do try and end on time. I'm going to turn it around and just, first of all, thank Amy for hosting us in your home today, and for Sebastian for joining us. You had a long journey at the end of your trip, what, a block and a half around the corner
we
here?
We live in the same neighborhood.
So that was helpful. My name is Neil Parekh, and I was the guest host for Shree's Sunday New York Times read-along, focusing on the 52 places list. We had a great production team, Paula Kiger on Facebook, Steve Taylor on LinkedIn, Tim Stone managing all of the background using StreamYard, which is a great app. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I know that Sree was very disappointed that he couldn't be here today, but he's in Mumbai doing some great work with Pratham, India, a group doing a lot of good work around education, and so he had to be there. For next week, our guest is going to be Walter Greason, who is a professor at Monmouth University, a historian and educator, and I'm very excited to have him on the show in the run-up to Martin Luther King Day. So hopefully you will join us. We do the live stream every week on Facebook and LinkedIn at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And please tell your friends, share the show after the fact, and we'll be looking through the comments, and maybe Amy and Sebastian, if you have a chance as well. I know there's some questions that came in that we couldn't get to. So if you can take a look and respond to folks, we'd really appreciate it. With that, we will call it a show. And again, thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.